Dear friends, today we will talk about a topic that affects each of us, even though many avoid discussing it openly. We will discuss what happens to the souls of our loved ones in those moments when we say goodbye to them. Many of you have experienced loss: parents, spouses, friends, or even children. This pain can sometimes feel unbearable, leaving a void in the heart that seems impossible to fill. Imagine a situation familiar to many. A person stands by a hospital bed, holding the hand of a loved one who has always been their support. In such moments, many questions arise. What to say to someone who is leaving? How to express all the gratitude, all the love, all the forgiveness that fills the heart? And most importantly, does the soul hear us in these final moments? Does it feel our touch, our love, our forgiveness? These questions can haunt many people long after their loved ones have passed away. Answers can be sought everywhere: in books, in conversations with clergy, psychologists, or with those who have experienced similar situations. Today's conversation is an attempt to share knowledge that may bring a bit of comfort and understanding to your life if you are going through a similar experience or are just preparing for it. Saying goodbye to loved ones is not just a ritual or a social obligation. It is a deeply spiritual process that touches the most delicate strings of the human soul and potentially influences the souls of those who leave this world. Regardless of religious beliefs or the lack thereof, there is something universal in how people experience these moments. Today's conversation will help to better understand what happens in these sacred moments of farewell and may provide tools to make this process more conscious and healing, both for those who remain and for those who are being said goodbye to. Because understanding is the first step towards healing in this complex emotional journey. What happens to the soul of the deceased when we say goodbye to them? This question concerns many people, especially in moments of losing a loved one. The process of farewell has a dual nature. For the living, it is a process of letting go, accepting the fact of loss, and beginning a life without the physical presence of a loved one. For the departed, it may be a moment of transition, liberation, and transformation. In many spiritual traditions, there is the belief that the soul does not immediately leave this world after the physical death of the body. In some cultures, there is talk of 40 days, in others, a year, and in yet others, 7 days. But there is almost always a period when the soul is still close to those it loved in life, as if waiting for a final goodbye before moving on. When looking at various religious traditions, one can see that many speak of the importance of saying goodbye for the soul of the deceased. In Christianity, prayers for the departed are considered a help for the soul in its journey. In Buddhism, the Bardo practice helps the soul to properly navigate the transitional state. In Judaism, Shiva, the 7-day mourning period, is seen as a time when the soul is still present with the family. Modern researchers of near-death experiences such as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Raymond Moody have gathered numerous accounts showing that at the moment of clinical death, people often feel separated from their bodies, observe what is happening from the outside, and can perceive the emotions and words of those around them. If these accounts are accurate, then the moment of farewell can indeed be heard by the departed individual. The goal of today's discussion is not merely to understand the theoretical aspects of what happens to the soul of the deceased during farewell. It is much more important to understand how this knowledge can help us make the process of saying goodbye more conscious, healing, and meaningful, both for ourselves and, perhaps, for the souls of our loved ones who have already departed this world or are on the brink of transition. This understanding can bring comfort in difficult moments and help transform grief into a process of deep spiritual growth. The connection between the living and the departed is not completely severed at the moment of physical death. Many people continue to feel the presence of a loved one after their passing. The energetic bond formed over years of shared life, love, and interaction persists even after the physical body ceases to exist. This is not just a comforting idea. It is an experience shared by millions of people around the world, regardless of culture and religious beliefs. Martha, a woman from the suburbs of Chicago, lost her husband John after 40 years of marriage. In the days following his death, while preparing for the funeral, she distinctly felt his presence in their shared home. "I knew he was near, especially when I spoke to him out loud," Sometimes I felt a light touch on my shoulder or smelled his cologne, even though there was no one in the room. In moments when I forgave him for our past grievances and asked for forgiveness for mine, I felt a particularly strong connection as if he heard every word I said, Martha recounts. Modern neurobiology is starting to find explanations for such phenomena. Research shows that the brain of a person who is experiencing grief is activated in a special way. Areas responsible for social interaction and emotional connection continue to function as if the departed person is still physically present. This may explain the sensation of the presence of the deceased that many people describe. However, beyond the scientific explanation, there remains the question, could this be more than just a function of our brain, but a real connection to the soul of the departed? One important aspect of the connection between the living and the departed is the concept of unfinished business. Often the soul seems unable to move on, while certain important matters remain unresolved. These can be unspoken words of love, unforgiven grievances, unsaid things, or unfulfilled promises. In such cases, the process of saying goodbye and forgiving can play a key role for both the living and the departed. Psychologists working with people experiencing loss note that recognizing and processing such unfinished business often becomes a turning point in the grieving process. When a person is able to express what was left unsaid during the life of a loved one, many describe the feeling that their words were truly heard and that the soul of the departed received what it needed to move forward. Moments of forgiveness can act as unique portals for the soul of the deceased. When a living person sincerely forgives the departed or asks for forgiveness for their mistakes, a deep energetic exchange occurs that has the power to free the soul from the weight of earthly attachments and unresolved emotions. This liberation is akin to opening a door in a room that has lacked fresh air for too long. Robert, a schoolteacher from Boston, had a complicated relationship with his father. Years of misunderstanding, conflict, and estrangement created a wall between them. When his father unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack, Robert was left with a burden of unexpressed grievances and regrets. In the first months after my father's death, I felt only anger and disappointment. I thought that we would never have the chance to fix our relationship, he recounts. However, 6 months later, after a therapy session, Robert decided to write a letter to his deceased father. In this letter, he poured out all his feelings, anger, disappointment, but also love, and finally, forgiveness. When I spoke the words of forgiveness out loud while sitting by his grave, I felt an incredible relief. It was as if a heavy stone had fallen from my soul, and I suddenly felt my father's presence, not frightening, but warm and peaceful. At that moment, I realized that he too had received liberation. Many mediums, spiritual practitioners, and even some psychologists who work with grief describe similar accounts. They say that souls that have received forgiveness often convey feelings of gratitude and relief through dreams, signs, or simply a sudden sense of peace that comes to the living after the act of forgiveness. In various cultural and religious traditions, there are special rituals aimed at forgiving the deceased. A Catholic Mass for the repose of the soul, the Jewish Kaddish prayer, Buddhist offerings, all of these actions have deep psychological significance for the living and, according to beliefs, spiritual significance for the departed. They create a sacred space in which healing of relationships can occur, even when one of the participants is physically absent. It is important to understand that the act of forgiveness does not require special conditions or intermediaries. It can be performed anywhere and in any way, through a conversation with the photograph of the deceased, a letter, a visit to the grave, or simply a sincere talk with the soul of the departed in the silence of one's own heart. Healing through forgiveness works in both directions. It helps not only the souls of the departed, but also those who remain living with the pain of loss. When a person finds the strength to forgive the deceased for past grievances, or to ask for forgiveness for their own mistakes, a deep transformation occurs within themselves. It is as if the heavy chains that bound the heart finally fall away, allowing energy to flow freely and heal emotional wounds. Susan from Philadelphia shares her story of a complicated relationship with her mother. Throughout her life, there were many conflicts and misunderstandings between them. When Susan's mother died of cancer, she was left not only with the sorrow of loss, but also with the heavy burden of unspoken words and feelings. I couldn't sleep at night. I was tormented by memories of all our fights, of the words we hurled at each other in anger. I felt guilty and at the same time angry. It was an awful state, she recalls. The therapist suggested a forgiveness ritual for Susan. She was to write letters to her mother every day for a month, initially expressing all her negative emotions, then gradually transitioning to memories of good moments, and finally to words of forgiveness. I burned the last letter at sunset, imagining my words rising with the smoke to my mom. At that moment, I felt a sudden peace. For the first time in many months, I was able to truly smile while remembering her. And it was a remarkable coincidence. That night, I dreamed of my mom. She was smiling and looked healthy and happy. Psychologists identify several practical steps to forgiveness that can aid in the healing process. First, it involves acknowledging all your feelings without judgment, including anger, guilt, and love. Second, it is about expressing those feelings through letters, spoken conversations, or creating symbolic gifts for the deceased. Third, it involves conducting a personal farewell ritual, which may include visiting a special place, lighting a candle, or other meaningful actions. What is especially important to understand is that forgiveness does not mean forgetting or devaluing pain. To forgive does not mean to say, it's all okay, when it isn't. True forgiveness acknowledges the pain and consciously chooses to be freed from the chains of resentment and anger. Such forgiveness helps the living to move forward, preserving the bright memory of those who have departed, and perhaps helps the souls of the deceased to find peace and continue their journey. After acts of forgiveness and reconciliation with the departed, many people notice special signs and symbols that they interpret as responses or confirmations from the souls of the deceased. These manifestations can be quite varied, from the appearance of certain animals or birds to inexplicable coincidences, special dreams, or the sensation of the presence of a loved one. Such signs often bring comfort and confirmation that the connection continues to exist beyond physical life. The most common ways in which souls may respond to our forgiveness include dreams of special clarity and emotional richness. In such dreams, the deceased often appears healthy, happy, and conveys important messages. Many people describe these dreams not as ordinary, but as encounters, after which there remains a feeling of real contact. Viewers often share similar stories. Elizabeth from Denver recounts, "After I finally managed to forgive my brother for an old family dispute that remained unresolved until his death, I had an unusual dream. He came to me, looked young and healthy, and simply said, 'Now it's all okay, Ellie.' No one but him had ever called me that name. Upon waking, I felt such peace, as if the burden I had carried for years had simply disappeared." For James from Chicago, a song became familiar, which he and his wife considered theirs. "After her death, I couldn't listen to that melody without tears. But one day, after spending the whole day sorting through her things and mentally talking to her, asking for forgiveness for our fights, that song unexpectedly played on the radio, even though it was an old hit from the 70s. At that moment, the only picture frame in the room fell off the table but did not break. I felt that this was her way of telling me that she hears me and forgives me too." Psychologists note that distinguishing true signs from projections of our consciousness is not always easy. Important criteria can include the unexpectedness of the sign, its relevance to the personality of the deceased, and the deep emotional impact it has. However, regardless of the explanation, whether it is a real contact with the soul or a function of our subconscious, these signs play an important role in the healing process. To be more attentive to possible manifestations of the presence of those who have departed, specialists recommend setting aside a few minutes each day for silence and mindfulness, paying attention to unusual coincidences, and trusting one's intuitive feelings, without dismissing them immediately as just imagination. Various cultural traditions of saying goodbye to the deceased exist in all societies and hold deep meanings that go beyond mere social rituals. In the United States, Memorial Day, celebrated on the last Monday of May, has become a time when Americans visit cemeteries, decorate graves with flowers, and remember their departed loved ones. Originally, this day was dedicated to fallen soldiers, but has evolved over time into a celebration of the memory of all who have passed away. Different religious traditions also have their own special farewell rites. Christian funerals often include a service in a church, where attendees not only mourn the deceased, but also pray for their soul, believing that these prayers assist the soul in its posthumous journey. In Jewish tradition, the Shiva period, 7 days of intense mourning, creates a space where loved ones can grieve together and share stories about the deceased, helping both the soul and themselves in the process of transition. Despite the variety of rituals across different cultures, several common elements can be identified that are believed to assist the soul of the deceased. These include public acknowledgement of the transition, expressing gratitude for the person's life, forgiveness and the asking for forgiveness, as well as creating a symbolic connection between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Michael, a retiree from Seattle, faced the necessity of creating a special farewell ritual for his wife Carol, who was interested in Eastern spiritual practices, although she grew up in a Christian family. When Carol was dying from Alzheimer's disease, we talked a lot about how she would like to be buried. She asked to combine elements from different traditions that were dear to her, recalls Michael. For the farewell ceremony, he combined a traditional Christian service with elements of a Buddhist ceremony, including meditation and the reading of passages from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. We also asked each guest to write a short letter to Carol expressing love, gratitude, or forgiveness. We burned these letters together in a special bowl, imagining how our words reached her soul. It was an incredibly healing experience for all of us, and I felt that Carol would have been pleased. Grief specialists increasingly emphasize the value of creating personal farewell rituals that reflect the uniqueness of the relationship with the departed person. This can include an annual visit to a favorite place of the deceased, creating a memorial in their honor, or even regular conversations with them on particularly significant dates. Such personalized rituals can be especially healing for both the living and the souls of the departed, as they stem from sincere feelings and take individual spiritual needs into account. Summarizing our discussion on what happens to the soul of the deceased during moments of forgiveness, it is worth highlighting a few key thoughts that can serve as support for those going through the process of losing a loved one. Forgiveness is truly a powerful act of love, which can influence not only ourselves, but also the souls of those who have passed away. When we forgive or ask for forgiveness, we free not only ourselves, but also possibly help the soul of the deceased to be liberated from earthly attachments and to move forward in its spiritual journey. For everyone who is currently experiencing loss, it is important to remember, your forgiveness is indeed a gift, a priceless present for you and for those you love, but who can no longer be physically present in your life. Do not rush the process. Give yourself time and space to experience all your emotions, including anger and sorrow. Forgiveness cannot be forced or superficial. It must come from within when you are ready. Be kind to yourself in the process of grieving and saying goodbye. Remember that each person experiences loss in their own way, and there is no right or wrong way to mourn. Listen to your heart and trust your feelings when it comes to signs and symbols from the departed. What may seem like a simple coincidence to others may be a meaningful message from a loved one to you. Create your own farewell rituals and ways to maintain connection with the departed. Whether it is an annual visit to a special place, creating a memory album, or simply having quiet conversations with a photograph of a loved one. These actions help to structure grief and gradually transform the sharp pain of loss into a quiet, bright memory. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is that the bond of love is indeed stronger than death. Physical separation does not mean the end of the relationship. It simply changes its form. True forgiveness creates a bridge between worlds, through which the energy of love can flow, healing wounds and bringing peace and comfort to both sides. For those who are particularly struggling right now, remember that you are not alone in your grief. Millions of people have walked this path before you and found ways not only to survive, but to discover new meaning and depth. Stay connected with others. Seek support from friends, family, or support groups. In communicating with those who understand your feelings, you can often find comfort and the strength to move forward while keeping the love for those who have departed in your heart. Thank you very much for watching this video about the spiritual process of saying goodbye and its impact on the souls of departed loved ones. We hope that this conversation has brought you comfort and helped you better understand your feelings in times of loss. If this topic has touched your heart or helped you in the process of saying goodbye to a loved one, please support our channel, subscribe, and click the bell icon to not miss new videos on topics of spirituality, healing, and finding meaning in the most challenging life situations. Your comments and stories are also very important to us. They help create content that truly addresses your questions and needs. Share your experiences in the comments below the video. Perhaps your story will help someone who is going through a similar experience. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. See you in the next episode.